Hey guys, this is Alex. This is going to be my quarterly sprint video. This quarter I worked on action plans and learning pathways, the Learning Pathways project. So the motivation for this project was that I wanted to help learners build real projects and to do so more efficiently. Currently, learners look through Stack Overflow, or they'll look for similar tutorials that are similar to the projects that they are trying to build. But oftentimes they won't be able to find these tutorials, and so they turn to, as I said, other tutorials or Stack Overflow or experts that they know. And usually, unless they have an expert that they are working with, they run into a lot of roadblocks. And so I wanted to somehow pass on the knowledge that people gain when they learn a system or they learn a framework back to the beginners who are just beginning to build their first personal projects. So one of the bigger research contributions I made this quarter, I think, was looking at what makes a good tutorial, and I did a survey of current tutorials, and I tried to codify some of the best practices. And I did a couple of interviews about how people learned web development, and so this was more on the learning sciences side of things. But I'm going to give you an overview of everything that I did this quarter. So if you saw the first sprint video, I began with a look into Kanban boards, and I thought that maybe a Kanban board would be a good way to split up a big task into smaller decomposable tasks, so that the learner, could see exactly what still needed to be done and have a very visual way to see everything. I decided to use the Kanban board because this is something that is done in practice, especially for professional web development teams. And so I thought it'd be cool, and it might actually be applicable to learners. And so as you can see here, this is just a screenshot, but we have our to-do, doing, done columns, but everything else is also color-coded by the component that it corresponds to. So for example, all the green tasks correspond to setting up Meteor Angular. And then all the orange tasks correspond to getting a login button and security. And so the idea here is that after the first couple of action plans are created, the first couple of Kanban boards are created in this system, then we will already have a couple of tasks which each correspond to components, so that when new requests for help come in, we could look through the text and see which features does it require, which frameworks will it use, and based off these features and frameworks, we could pull in sets of tasks corresponding to either a framework or a component or a feature. And in this way, we would be able to generate these Kanban boards for learners pretty quickly. And so the idea here was that everything was very reusable and recyclable, and so we would only be, and so we could minimize expert effort. And so I decided to use this on my own, and I tried it on my own, and this is the one that I actually tried. I tried to replicate Google's Keep app, and I gave myself a lot of tasks, all the tasks that I thought I would need, and then I tried to use it. And I found that just the lack of structure made it very difficult to complete the task. So later on, I moved on. I did some need finding, and so I interviewed multiple learners, and these are the findings I found. So currently, existing tutorials do not explain the app folder structure or the project structure. The answers are right there. You simply copy out the answers, and this is an issue because learners, more than wanting to complete a tutorial, they want to learn the things that the tutorial is teaching in order for them to implement it into their own systems. They also want to understand the motivations for doing things, not just copying code. What I mean by this is that, so for example, if a tutorial is teaching you how to use promises, it shouldn't just teach you how to use promises, but why you might not want to use promises, or what your code would look like if you weren't using promises. They wanted to learn best practices in industry, and how to use documentation. So this was a big point. Documentation was very scary, and a lot of learners felt that going into their very first personal projects, they had very little clue how to approach and read through documentation. They mentioned that difficulty could be a good thing, so sometimes struggling helps develop motivation for these best practices, etc. You can read all of my findings in my design log. So from here, I developed a set of hypotheses about what made a good action plan. And so these are the hypotheses I have here. And so I developed a set of tutorials or action plans to test these hypotheses. I never got around to testing these hypotheses because I had a very hard time getting testers. But I went ahead and built a system. So here's the system. You can give your project a title and give it a description about like what you want it to do, the features it should have, maybe some frameworks that you're familiar with, and then you can, and then an expert would be able to open up your request, see your request as a prompt, and then within here add tasks and milestones. So in my definition of an action plan is associated with an ordered set of milestones. So these kind of correspond to what you would think would be maybe like a mini agile sprint. So something that could be completed in maybe 3 or 4 hours. So the first thing in this one, this is for an auto-updating research paper. So for the first milestone, it would be a web page with your current research paper displayed, then a web page where the text or numbers or graphs are automatically generated based on dummy JavaScript variables, and then etc. Within each milestone, you have subtasks, which correspond to things that you should do in order to finish your milestone. And then optionally, you can include a reference for that task, so that the learner can, if the learner doesn't know exactly how to do one of the tasks in the milestone, then he or she can just go to the reference and hopefully figure out how to do that task and therefore complete the milestone. So in this system, this kind of builds off of work in the Human Computation with Global Constraints paper, as well as the Task Genies paper. So you have what would be the brain stream on the right-hand side. I call it the suggestions or the sandbox. Experts can input new milestones or tasks in the suggestions box or in the actual action plan itself, or they can move things around. They can move tasks around or entire milestones around, and this just helps to This just allows experts to plan opportunistically, so top down on the side or bottom up on the side. So one of the things that I found with this system was that it wasn't super reusable. So this system on its own, it looked like the expert would have to find tasks over and over, and I couldn't think of a good way to automatically bring in work that other experts had done in the past for other action plans. And so this led me to the idea of putting the action plan here and the Kanban board here together, in a sense. So the next step, I haven't implemented this yet, but I think that a really cool thing to do would be to implement this kind of Kanban board where we have tasks labeled with components into the suggestions box over here, into the sandbox over here. So when you create a new task, in this milestone, when you create a new task, so for example, if we had this format your research paper as you see fit using HTML, CSS, and we had a reference to it, then we could learn that maybe this reference was associated to HTML and CSS. And then in the future, whenever someone is creating a new task and types in something about HTML, CSS, then hopefully we could automatically suggest a URL there for them. And so if we could do that, and if we could learn components or features that each link was associated with, then we could. I think that we could be able to help the experts a lot just by giving them suggestions in this sandbox here that they could just pull, drag and drop, essentially. And so if we could do that, then an expert's job would simply become almost just dragging and dropping things and rearranging things to make sure that they fit, and of course giving the milestone a description. But other than that, I believe that if we could do this, then an expert could probably actually generate an action plan within 5 to 10 minutes. And I think that this is very valuable, as an action plan that an expert could take 5 to 10 minutes to generate would actually be able to help a learner significantly in their own personal projects. And so this is kind of just explaining. So like, if we figured out all these tasks and they each corresponded to different components, then if we could automatically suggest these components up here, all these references up here, then hopefully it'd be very easy for an expert to create an action plan. So key design ideas. Reusability is a big thing, I think, just because we want to minimize expert effort. I think that self-sourcing, we need to take into account that we want the learner to be able to do some of the planning. Right now, we aren't looking to the user to do any of the planning, whereas I think that it might be possible to ask the learner to put in some very minimal effort. When I was interviewing people about creating action plans, they felt that one of the biggest problems was that they didn't know what the learner knew and whether or not to continue explaining how to do one particular milestone, or to leave it sort of abstract or vague, and maybe the learner did know how to do that even if the expert didn't spend a whole lot of time explaining it. So there needs to be some sort of way that the expert and the learner can communicate. I haven't really thought about that too much, but I know that for this system to be successful, there needs to be some sort of communication. And then opportunistic planning, just because it's sometimes a lot more difficult to plan from the top down, whereas bottom up, if we just know there are a lot of tasks that we need to do, then like putting them together could be something we figure out afterwards. So next steps, so other questions that I think are very relevant in the context of action plans. So the first one I think is really cool. So if you think about it, there is some sort of trade-off that the time that an expert puts into developing an action plan, there's a trade-off between how much time the expert puts in versus how much time the learner saves. And so if we could figure out this trade-off, and then there might be an economically optimal way to route unfinished plans, or to retire plans that may or may not be completely finished. And then so some more of the AI stuff, I guess. How do we suggest potential next tasks? And so this could be back in here. How do we create the sandbox, and how do we suggest tasks to be chosen to put into the sandbox? How do we encourage contribution from experts? And how do we build a community where learners become experts? I think this is going to be a big thing, because just because after a learner completes a couple of projects, then he or she may become competent in creating action plans in the future, maybe even more so than an expert who has never used an action plan. And so if we can somehow make this grow this community such that learners want to become experts and give back, and can somehow just continuously, so that we always have experts in the system, I think that this could be really powerful.